Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Yelled. I'm a dietitian in Stockholm, Sweden, where I work at the Karolinska University Hospital in pediatric diabetes. And pediatric diabetes is also my PhD project, and John has been kind enough to invite me to talk a little bit about my experiences working with young kids and specifically the hybrid closed loops or the automated insulin delivery insulin pumps. So I've named this very brief overview because John did not give me a lot of time to talk about this. The challenges with young children in type 1 diabetes and are insulin pumps with AID the solution. This is just to give you a brief outline of what I thought that I'd be talking about today. First, I want to start by talking about how to actually achieve those glucose outcomes, the time and target that we aim for. In Sweden, we reach for time and tight target, meaning 4 to 8 millimoles per liter. And what are the challenges specific to young children with type 1 and achieving those targets? And what does the AID systems bring to the tables? And then I want to end off by showing some examples and some of the considerations that I've noticed from the time working with these AID systems. And I just want to say that we have the Medtronic 780G, we have the Tandem Control IQ, and we have the IPSO pump with the CAM APS FX app. We do not have the Omnipod 5. I know that you guys do, but I won't be able to share any experience from that system. So I want to start off by showing you this picture from an article written by Rowan Seckold and the Newcastle team in Australia. I think this article really sums up what we need to do to achieve good glycemic outcomes. We need to carb count. We need to have that insulin to carb ratio. We need to pre-bolus. We need to have the structured meals, the breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe 1, 2, 3 snacks, depending on how old the kid is. We need to make healthy food choices. Not only do we need to think about what kind of carbs we choose, but also the portion size and the total carb load. And also, we know now that we need to add extra insulin for high fat and high protein meals, or otherwise, we're going to have some troubles with those postprandial glucose rises. But again, keeping this in mind and then using this when we talk about young children, it's going to be really difficult. So carb counting can actually be an extra challenge when you have a very young child. We know that parents tend to go to foods that are easy to count, and they tend to limit themselves to those meals and also to meals that they know the child will eat. So matching insulin to carbs, that is a huge challenge because these kids, what they liked yesterday, they don't like today, and they can say they're hungry, but then still won't eat. So it's very difficult when we have young kids to know how many carbs to bolus for. And it's specifically difficult to pre-bolus because you don't want to have a lot of insulin in the system, and then your child doesn't eat. So being able to maybe give multiple boluses. If you know the child is going to eat 10 or 20 grams, bolus for that. And if they eat more, bolus for that during the meal. It's always good to have at least some insulin in when the child starts to eat. But that's really difficult if they're on pens. So insulin injections here is a huge challenge. And we want, obviously, all our younger kids on the insulin pump. Fear is the main drive for these parents. Fear of hypoglycemia, fear of hyperglycemia. Parents obviously they don't want their kids to go low, so they underbolus, they undervalue the amount of carbs the kid is going to eat, and then they get high, and then they get super scared that the kid is going to go high all day, and then they give a large bolus, and then they go hypo anyway. I see this all the time. And stress. obviously, stress is present in everyday life if you have diabetes or not. So just adding that diabetes makes it even worse. And when you're under stress, you take poor decisions. And obviously, very young kids have a high variability in insulin need. So it changes from day to day, from week to week. And obviously, it changes if they go to school or daycare one day and then they're home on the weekend. That insulin need is going to change as well. So what we want is we want our kids to be on the insulin pumps. We don't want to do unnecessary injections if we don't have to. And obviously the pens can only administer half a unit, whereas pumps can give tiny doses of zero point 0.1 units. And we also want the flexibility of basal adjustments. So having a temp basal to lower the temp basal if we're going swimming or we're going to the park or being active, and being able to give a higher basal on sick days, for example, is a very good um, setting that we want in our pumps. Obviously, we have that possibility to give multiple boluses if we're not sure how much the kid is going to eat. We can start off by at least giving a small bolus, and then if they finish their meals, we can give that the rest of that bolus. We can also use the dual wave function, which limits the interactions with the child because kids are used to being handled a lot, giving boluses, checking glucose. So dual waves gives us the possibility to give maybe 60-70% of the bolus up front before eating, and then the rest of that bolus goes in on a time schedule that we set. And if they don't finish the food, we can just stop that bolus from going in. But all of this requires manual action, and obviously I've seen parents do like 15, 20 boluses per day, and it's not good. It's not good for the child. It's not good for the parent. So we need to give the parent some time off. And that's where the AID systems come in, because instead of a parent having to make a decision, the algorithm in the pump makes a decision every 5 minutes based on CGM readings. And obviously, no parent can achieve that. So it adjusts to these variable insulin requirements. The pump can suspend if the glucose is going low to prevent hypoglycemia. We can also reduce time in hyperglycemia by increasing basal automatically or giving auto corrections. And there are some articles out now that say you can be less accurate when you carb count. And obviously, this might actually be helpful for parents with young kids, instead of being really specific, not feeling that they have to be on point with their carb counting. The pump is actually going to handle if you miscalculate. That's a security that most parents would enjoy. So it relieves the parent, and obviously also the child. The AID system relieves the parent. And the biggest advantage is sleep. You have perfect nights, keeping you in target. The system does this automatically. And when you have parents that get to sleep, you get happier parents and they make better decisions. So these are very, very good advantages of the automated insulin delivery systems. However, the system isn't perfect. We still actually need to do the manual bolus. We need to count the carbs because the algorithms aren't advanced enough to notice when a meal is coming in and giving that glucose rise. So we still need to carb count. And even though we have these articles saying you don't have to be as accurate, we know if you want to be in tight control, if you want the really good outcomes, you actually do need to be carb counting pretty accurately. So you need to be within those 10 grams, I think. And I don't think these systems adjust well enough for giving a late bolus. So we still want to pre-bolus. If we want to be in target, we need to pre-bolus. We still need to give that, because if you eat, the glucose is going to rise so fast that the system isn't advanced enough to handle that. We still have more time out of target if we bolus late. And it can't adjust for snacking. So a couple of grams of carbs here, a couple of grams of carbs there, it's gonna screw your outcomes up. You're not gonna be in target. And again, I think this is also a choice, right? What outcomes are you looking for? Because the system is going to handle it pretty well, but I don't think it's well enough if we want our kids to achieve those 48 millimoles per mole of HbA1c. So we need the meal routines. We need the structure. And I don't think these systems are advanced enough to adjust for activity. So we still need to consider this. We need to add extra carbs when we use extra energy. We need to fill up. We need to make sure we don't have too much insulin on board. And we need to consider this before activity, during activity, and after activity. The system obviously helps, but again, to not have any hypos during activity, we need to think as well. So it comes back to basics still. We need to count carbs, we need to pre-bolus, we need to have structured meals, we need to make healthy food choices. The basics still apply. And some of the considerations that I think need to be made, that you need to be aware of, and in my experience, is obviously these kids with a very low need of insulin, because you can have pretty long suspensions. And I'm going to show you some examples of this as well. And everybody comes back to this: let the system work. If you have a parent who usually or did before the AID system handled the kid a lot, did a lot of those boluses, and was really active, that parent now needs to learn to sit on their hands and let the system work. Because if we start making decisions and not letting the algorithm work, we're probably just going to make it worse. And also, all of these systems work differently. Um, so that puts a lot of strain on the team, because we need to know all of these pumps, we need to know all of these algorithms, and then maybe tailor it to that patient. So we know what system is appropriate for what parent or family or patient. And also so that the family and the parents are aware of how this algorithm thinks and how it works, so they don't work against each other. And also to all the dietitians and obviously doctors and nurses as well, I I think these AID system makes it a little bit difficult for us to evaluate the carb intake and the ratios. And I'll show you this in an example as well, because they have different ways of showing you how the insulin has been distributed. So it looks like a lot of carbs have been consumed when they haven't been. And I think that makes my job a little bit more difficult. And again, we need to understand what are settings for the pump, like carb ratios, glucose targets, and whatnot, and what are actually behaviors, like pre-bolusing, food choices, etc. So behavior is still a big part, and sometimes behavior is what needs to be changed and not settings. And it's finding out what is what that might be difficult. And so I just wanted to show you, this is an example of those long, low suspension. So we can see that the pump during the night here has suspended for quite a while. There are tiny little dots there where like a basal basic insulin dose has been given. This is the IPSO pump, so they have, I think every 2 hours, something like that, they have this minimal bolus going in, but obviously it doesn't do anything. So this child has been more or less without insulin for a lot of hours, and that's going to lead them into hyperglycemia afterwards. And again, you can also see that um, this IPSO algorithm, um, it looks like there's a lot of boluses going in, but I think this is just somebody who has been using the slow absorbed meal. So it looks like there's like lots of carbs going in here, but I don't think there is. So that's what I mean with making it really difficult to analyze what's really going on. And obviously it looks like the bolus isn't big enough for the meal, so they have undervalued the amount of carbs here. And this is another example. This is a Control IQ, the tandem pump. Here you can actually see an example of a long suspend, but the glucose is actually not going high. So I'm suspecting, again, because the glucose is going low a couple of times during the day, um, is that there's actually something going on with the basal and the bolus. So I think young children need to have less basal and more bolus. You can go 70-30 in bolus basal, or even 20% basal and 80% bolus. Um, so getting that right, I think is a little bit of a challenge. But with these systems, it's better to use the boluses in my experience. And here is an example of the auto corrections that the tandem give. And you can see it after breakfast, 21 grams of carbs were added into the pump. It wasn't enough, so the glucose is going really high, and then it's just plummeting down. Um, and then 1 hour later, the tandem gives an autocorrection, which just brings you further down. So again, knowing how the system works, we need to have that pre-bolus up front so we don't get that autocorrection afterwards, and then just causing this variability. And some considerations for each system. So again, knowing that the tandem Control IQ has those auto corrections, it will only give you one correction per hour, and it will give you that correction 60 minutes after the latest bolus. So again, even though the glucose was actually coming down on the previous slide pretty heavily, it was the pump was correcting, obviously not making it better and causing this kid to go into hypo. So even though the basal suspended, we had that autocorrection with insulin causing the hypo. And I think the insulin sensitivity factor for the tandem pump is really important. So the ISF sets both how the basal is going to change, how it's going to increase and decrease, but also the autocorrections are tailored to the ISF. So getting that correct is important to have a good system going. The Medtronic 780G, I think this is the system or the algorithm that you really need to leave alone. We don't want parents going in here tampering, putting in extra fake carbs to get corrections, because if they add extra carbs in, it's going to deliver insulin, and that's going to change the total daily dose, and that's what runs the algorithm. So this pump recalculates every night. So if you have a too high total daily dose, it's going to make the pump too aggressive, and so it kind of counteracts itself. So don't add in fake carbs, because that's going to screw up the algorithm. However, saying that, what we have seen is that for these young kids specifically, um, it doesn't offer a big enough bolus for breakfast a lot of the times. So you need to be kind of sharp in your carb ratio for breakfast, and some actually need to add a little bit of extra carbs there, because what happens is, and this is for every system, if you bolus late, or if you don't add in enough carbs, the glucose is going to go high, and then the system, the algorithm, is going to want to correct that. So it increases its basal, it increases or gives maybe an autocorrection to bring that high glucose down. And then if the kid goes up to play, or if you have an activity, it's going to cause you to go low instead. So we want the insulin for the food, and we want the bolus pre-food, in order to work at its best. So again, working like with the system and not against it. And my experience so far with the Ipso pump, the CAM APS, is there's this function called slowly absorbed carbs, which you can use if you have those high fat, high protein meals. But my experience is that it does not work. It does not give you enough insulin. So don't use it. Do a two bolus program where you bolus some before, and then bolus again maybe an hour and a half later. I think that works better if you want to keep your glucose in target. And this pump is really good for using the glucose target. You can choose your target yourself. It's not a set target. So work with this. If you are scared of hypos during the night, set a little bit of a higher glucose target. If you have an activity, change the glucose targets. It's really easy. So I've found that to be a very good way to making the pump more or less aggressive, instead of using the boost and ease off, which I think sometimes can be too aggressive and too eased off. So the glucose targets, I think it's just been easier. Yeah, again, this was just a brief kind of introduction, or a brief overview of my experiences of working with young kids and AID systems. And I just want you to think about these meal structures and the food choices, because that's really the most important part of diabetes care. I think you can have almost any systems, but if you don't have the structure, if you don't choose wisely, it's going to be difficult to be in target. And these systems are absolutely great. Obviously, a couple of considerations, but it is fantastic. So let the system do what it does best, and let it work alone. Don't go in and tamper. Make the make the parents sit on their hands. But know how the pump works. Know the algorithm of your pump. So you know if when it autocorrects and how it works, if you're going to use the glucose targets, if you're going to use the ISF, know how your pump works. So that's actually on you guys who see these patients, to help them with that. So I hope you've learned something. I hope it was value in this. If you have any questions, um, please email me. Thank you so much for listening.